Hey guys, it's Daniel,
And it's Kyle.
and we're here doing a podcast recap of our project, the Wild Wild West sound replacement.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's the final scene from the Wild Wild West film. I think it's 2001 with Will Smith. The final scene where they're like fighting in the big mecha tarantula.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I guess what we're going to go over here is we're quickly going to go over our project management in regards to how we ran things, how we ran the sessions, and then we're going to go over some of our more creative and technical decisions and really dig into the meat of it. So here we go.
Yeah, well, so teamwork is the first thing we're going to talk about. So this project was actually me, Dan, and another one of our mates, Josh, who unfortunately didn't join us today. Essentially, when we picked up this project, it was meant to be like a small side project, which it ended up being, but it was kind of rushed because we all just thought, hey, let's do a sound replacement. Found a clip, picked it up.
Just to sort of bolster our portfolios. And when it originally started, the scope of the project was much smaller. We only planned to have it go for about a minute.
I think it was 30 seconds
30
originally,
seconds.
and then we
Sorry,
jumped
that
it
was
up
it.
to a minute.
From 30 seconds to a minute. And so we really had to expand the scope, and that's why we ended up bringing Josh onto the project, because he came in to help us out with the session. Everything was going so smoothly, we thought, why not expand the scene, get to do a bit more work, get to have a more impressive final piece.
And essentially the clip that we had for 30 seconds was really out of context, didn't really have a cool beginning, cool ending. It was just kind of there because it had a lot of good stuff for us to sound replace. But by getting that extra hand, we could double the time, get a full flowing scene that really let us...
we could have like a proper soundtrack that, flows in and out of it. It doesn't just cut abruptly into a fight and then, cut abruptly out of it.
Yeah.
There's a bit of build up. So with good planning and communication, we were actually able to work pretty quickly and efficiently on this project. I think we banged it out relatively quickly.
I think it was 2 weeks we got the whole thing done.
From when we started and finished the recording. We'd had plans for it a little bit longer, but we as we got into it, we were really on top of our session bookings, and it was a good way to just sort of keep rolling on through the project. We came out of a booking one afternoon and into another one the next day, and then out of it, and we were always evolving our plans.
Yeah, and communicating with each other, availabilities. So if someone couldn't make it to a session, there was always, if we couldn't change when the session was, there was always someone with the same skills that could take their place.
Exactly.
Or bring in Foley equipment that they were going to bring in, something along those lines.
So essentially it meant that at the very least there was always two people working on it, meaning that we tore through it a lot quicker than we thought, which was great. So I guess now we're going to move on to some of the more creative decisions that we made during this endeavor. And we'll start off with the recording and mixing techniques. So originally we planned to use an NT5, and we really wanted to get a clean sound, I guess, was our main concern, obviously, as we were doing sound replacement. We wanted something that would sound good for vocals, ADR, all of the Foley, and that we could potentially use for, some other recordings that we might have needed. But the NT5 was taken, so we had to settle on an NTK. And we ended up deciding to use this for the rest of the project just to keep it consistent.
Yeah, we decided to at least try and get the NTK out for every session we were doing. Ask ahead of time, hey, stick it aside if you can.
Just because that is... Once we started using it, we didn't want to start swapping between mics because we thought it would ruin the... It might cause it to be a little bit inconsistent. Yeah. So, other than that, we used the NTK for everything, and I did the voice acting for for Will Smith in the clip. Kyle did the voice acting, or rather grunts.
Yeah, the grunts for all four bad guys. That's me.
And we used a few tools during the mixing process there to help it blend in a bit better. We used pitch correction tools on myself to get my voice a little bit deeper to match Will Smith. And we used, I think, the timbre thing in Melodyne to sort of get it a little bit more into the tone of Will Smith's voice.
Apparently it worked. A lot of people were like,
Yeah.
hey, that sounds like Will Smith. So
Yeah, it was great. So obviously we're pretty stoked about that.
So a lot of the other sounds that we used, other than for ADR and everything, was because the fight was inside a big mecha tarantula. There's a lot of steampunky vibes going on with it, like big
Industrial sounds.
Yeah, big like cogs turning in the background, little steam pipes and everything everywhere. And because they're fighting in the middle of it, we really wanted to build the atmosphere around it. So we had a lot of external sounds, like just Atmos sounds from outside. We went inside Daniel's car and we like recorded sitting inside his car. We lifted up his bonnet, recorded the engine in there, stuck a Zoom recorder under the car to pick up some like of the deep engine grumbling.
And we really wanted to do that's the thing. We really wanted to try and record as many of the sounds as we could ourselves. And my car just happened to be old enough to make those sort of really groany mechanical noises, which was exactly what we were looking for. And to go along with that, we ended up layering quite a bit during the recording. We laid a lot of different ambient textures to sort of get that vibe that we wanted, and especially for things like the hits and impacts. There were a few times where we just thought one or two layers wasn't really cutting the mustard, so we had to, go with 5 or 6 just to get the real solid textures that we wanted, especially for things like sorry about the background noise. Especially for things like the one part where Will Smith hits the dude's leg with a big spanner, and we're like, it wasn't really having the impact we wanted, so we added in a bone cracking effect.
Yeah, that was really nasty. It gets me every time. It was like a celery stick, some cellophane breaking. I think it had some sticks breaking under it as well, all layered with like 3 impact sounds and a slap. And it really made it like beefy, but have a really nice cracking sound in it that fit pretty nicely.
It was awesome. And another cool thing that we did was for the footsteps, we noticed that when we recorded the footsteps initially, we just did them on a sort of dry sounding surface. It really wasn't matching the environment, which in the scene is all comprised of metal. Yeah,
it's like the metal grating that you see in like, I guess...
Like on scaffolding, I guess, is where you kind of... That's the sound we kind of wanted, the sound of somebody sort of running on echoed scaffolding. Yeah. So we went around SAE with a Zoom recorder and we found those little orange seats outside of the classroom.
Well, they're wired seats, just to clarify. Yeah. They're made purely out of like basket wire, essentially, like strong basket wire. So they don't break when you sit on them.
And so we got a few samples of various hits on that to get the ring out sound, and we ended up just going back and layering that sort of sporadically under the footsteps, especially during the scuffles, to make it sound like it was more part of the environment.
Yeah. So once we had all of our Atmos and ADR and everything down, we thought, that it fits the scene. Everything feels natural where it is. But in the original, when we listened back, we noticed that everything that they had in there worked except for the music.
Yes, so, they went with a real sort of classical sounding orchestral score.
It was like very Hollywood epic fight scene.
It was very dynamic, and I guess the intention was when they were making the movie, they didn't know obviously how it was going to turn out, and it turned out to be a flop.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, that soundtrack really doesn't work for what the film is. So we decided, or we thought to ourselves, what can we do to make that more consistent with the tone of the movie, which is already quite comedic, sort of, slapstick, sort of not as serious as what the soundtrack might lead you to believe. And looking at the theme of the movie, which is a sort of Western steampunk, sort of set in like, everyone's dressed like cowboys, we thought, why don't we try and emulate a spaghetti Western soundtrack? Because we thought that would really suit it a lot better. And I guess I went off and I sort of recorded the music and brought it in to the guys, and they, we sort of got feedback.
Yeah, mixed and matched how it fit into the scene, how we thought it let the scene flow a bit better.
Exactly where it should start and end, and that was really just a bunch of layers of heavily reverbed guitars. I really looked into surf music, which was a big influence there, because all the tones are very similar, the guitar tones. I looked in to the time period that kind of music was made in, spaghetti western, and I found out that the reason they did it is because they didn't have large Hollywood budgets for lush orchestral scores, especially in like Clint Eastwood movies. So they would use more percussive sounds, more sort of novelty sounds, and layer them in a rhythmic sense to make it a part of the music. So, eagle squawks, cowboys going, yeah, whip cracks, which I all tried to emulate myself with, belts, my own voice, guitars, obviously heavily reverbed, and, patting sounds to sort of, emulate horse clops and whatever. And I tried to keep that aesthetic going throughout the whole thing. And overall, what do we think of the aesthetics that we got?
I reckon
the entire project.
I reckon they worked really well. Like, everything fit the scene like really well. All of the like little touches, like the reverb on each like footstep, like the metal ringing out, definitely brought it from like it's believable to like a really like, hey, it actually sounds like they're walking in this space that you've put them in. And the music definitely helped to bring it all together rather than just being like a bunch of dudes dressed like cowboys fighting at a steampunk land. It's like
with a completely detached soundtrack. Yeah. We really tried to make the audio part of the narrative rather than just a thing. And even with our punches, we decided to sort of play them up, make them a bit more comical than they might have been. A lot more hollow, like dunk sounds for like the spanners hitting Will Smith's chest and whatnot, and like we mentioned before, the bones breaking. Yeah, just to sort of match the tone of the movie.
Because regardless of how Hollywood the original film was, like even just voice lines were just sound effects of them basically just talking smack to the other people.
Yeah. Cheesy
one-liners, everything that you expect out of like a movie that makes you laugh more than something you watch for kicks.
Exactly. It was more of that kind of movie than a real serious action movie. So that's kind of what we tried to do there.
So when we were recording some of these things, we were recording in the C24 studio on the SAE campus. And one issue that we find with this room is that the little recording booth we have has so much bleed from all the other studios in the room, on campus.
On campus, yes.
So there's a MIDI studio downstairs. People blare their bangers out of that. There's a Neve studio
just right down the hall.
Yeah, just down the hall.
On the same floor. You can hear drum bleed through that really, really terribly.
Yeah, so just that. There's a TV in the room and lights fixed to the roof that just constantly have some sort of buzz going on with them. Yeah. That's just how electricity is. You're going to pick it up in recordings. And sometimes noises were just way too quiet for us to not crank the gain right up and get those background noises. So to get around that,
we had to repair the audio quite a bit using a bunch of different techniques or methods. The most prominent we used was denoising the isotope plugins to sort of get rid of as much of the room noise and as many of the things as we could, because it was just starting to compound and it was starting to make everything sound messy.
Using like a top and tail kind of EQ did help to just clean up a little bit, but those denoising plugins are a godsend. Yeah. I love them.
And especially in the ambience, recording the car sounds outside, obviously it's sort of hard to predict. We're sort of just out there holding the mic up, trying to get as many sounds as we can. And, big run-on takes, they don't stay consistently usable. So we had to do a lot of chopping with the car sounds to get a nice small loop of the audio that would, fit for ambience and not, jump out at you and do something weird that doesn't sound like it fits.
It's always fun when we record 4 minutes of his car and just sit down picking out the best loop.
Yeah. Oh, that was interesting. All right. So moving on to mastering and loudness. Carl, do you want to?
Yeah, so when we were finally sitting down to mix and master everything, we thought it'd be best to see what the pros are doing. We sat down and we researched what the industry standard for like level is with film, or like sound to film.
Yep.
And we discovered that the average volume sits around -24 RMS, but peaks can go high.
That was LUFS.
Loofs.
Sorry, yeah.
Loofs, yes.
Yeah.
And peaks can go higher with like impacts, punch sounds, explosions, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
As long as it's not like a consistent louder than that, or
Yeah.
it's not like too sporadic a jump,
Yeah.
it's fine to go above that.
And I mean, we didn't really have any moments of insane, dynamic quietness and then loudness in our clip. So
Yeah.
we took that information, and even though we didn't really use it, it's good to know,
Yeah, we've essentially had like maybe one character yell loud at one point.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
That's it. And of course, after we figured that out, and after we did all our mixing, which included cleaning up using, various EQs, compressors on the vocals and whatnot, we went into the mastering process, which this is the first time we'd mastered anything for film. So we decided to make it as I guess we tried to do our best, obviously, but it was the first time we'd done it, so we kind of had to go with our gut a little bit. So from what we'd heard, we decided to use a reverb to mesh everything together, a very light reverb bus over the entire mix, just to give it a level of consistency across.
And make it sound like it's all in the same room rather
same
than
space
cutting
is.
between like one shot that has really clean samples and everything to one that maybe we denoised a little bit bad, so it really fills out and is noticeable.
And the other reason that we use the reverb is because it makes everything a little bit messier, but in a good way. It sort of fills in those dead spots and those awkwardly sort of not fitting, not meshing sounds. It makes it all sink into the one environment. After that, we used a cleaning EQ, which was usually just used to get rid of muddy textures every now and then.
Muddy low end, maybe too tingy of a high end or something.
And we use that also to kind of, just iron everything out for the subtle compression that came afterwards. Again, to tie everything together. We used compression on most of the subgroups and buses, very light compression already. But just one more here before we'd, again, hit the limiter right at the end. We wanted to make sure that the limiter didn't pump at all. We wanted it to sound as natural as possible. But before that, we also put on a sweetening EQ, which we use to, do things like accentuate the vocals, make sure that they're always on top of the mix, maybe add a bit more impact to the very, very low frequencies. So, hits would really feel like they were kicking you in the chest and whatnot. And then after that, we drove it into a multi-band, again, just to duck down some of those frequencies that might have been jumping out a bit too much, especially in, the muddy section. And maybe tame some, like Carl said, any really annoying high end. And then, of course, we chucked it into a limiter and made sure that it was sitting at the recommended level, which we discussed earlier. And that is how we did that. I think we did a decent job of that.
Yeah, I definitely think with everything that we did, it was an overall improvement, expanding on what the original was. Because
Exactly.
the original was just action. Ours was kind of action, comedy, western.
Yeah,
hybrid,
we
cool
tried
thing,
to play to the scene.
rather than having the scene just slapped in there.
In terms of technicality, I think we pulled it off with relative success. When we got feedback in the session, Guy was pretty kind about what he said.
Yeah, essentially
he said it was really good for our portfolios, which means that's good.
Essentially, the only feedback we did get, or creative criticism we got back, was that the punches were too comical, but in a sense that was what we were going for.
Yeah.
So it's a compliment in its own
It's
way.
interesting to take on board how we thought we were doing things, and I guess other people might interpret the scene differently. But no, overall it was really good. And one other thing that we got pretty kind feedback on from some of the students in the class was that they thought we used the original vocal stems from the movie. So which means we did a good job at using our corrective tools to move around Will Smith's vocals, or move around my vocals to make them sound like Will Smith and make everything sort of fit properly. And I guess overall, what do you think, if we were to do this again, what would we improve? I think personally, in terms of, if we just go back to the start, project management, I feel like there were some times there where we were sort of in limbo. Just every now and then it felt like, all right, we kind of forgot what we were doing, or we'd sort of go through our list of assets.
Yeah.
And then we still wouldn't be satisfied, and it took a bit of time to kind of like massage it to make it really feel like a scene.
Or to sometimes would straight up get lost in creativity rather than getting straight to the point. We'd end up finding like a really useful sound that we might use later on or for a different project, but it shouldn't really have been our focus for what we were doing in our sessions that we had booked for this project.
And a lot of things that a lot of things that came with that was that we'd sometimes just record one-shot samples and say, all right, we'll edit them into place afterwards, which it would have been better just to, do it as we, to match it up to the scene as we went.
Yeah.
Like I remember we got some bike pump samples that we thought would be good ambient textures, but we didn't really implement them until the final process. And that's when we found out that they didn't really work.
Yeah.
So just small things like that, I guess, for the next few projects would have to take into account.
Yeah, definitely a learning experience to help us, I guess, straighten up, make our performance in the studio a bit more professional rather than experimental. Like, it's good to experiment, but at the same time, it's good to keep focus on what you are in the studio for.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to be wasting time in the studio editing together things that you could be doing, just on a regular computer, when you should really be mixing and trying to listen to sound textures and be creative, which is what you want to do when you're in the studio.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that was the Wild West sound replacement, just a small post-mortem from us.
Yeah, a little bit of a insight into how some things were done.
And there'll be links to all of the sort of the references that we sort of danced around here in the description, or maybe throughout the video, just in case you want to read for yourself or see where we got our information from.
Yeah, cool.
All right, thanks.
Later.